was introduced, my name is Megan Pratt. I'm a senior in the politics department, and I'm going to be presenting on my thesis titled Down with the Sickness, which is a historical analysis of how we effectuate pandemic responses in America. So this research kind of started as a question about how our lack of substantive power scientific experts to express political leadership, how that influences how we respond to pandemics and what we're missing out on by lacking those offerings. But as the COVID situation developed on the global scale and as my research developed, I realized I wanted to do a more systemic analysis of why we see what we see in American pandemic response. So I did a longitudinal analysis of case studies starting in the 1990s and ending in the current day. And what emerges is a story about how pandemic response is conceptualized and shared by both public health and security agencies, and how that dual oversight really influences and shapes how pandemic responses are created and effectuated in America. But that's not really what we're going to be talking about today. It's a big topic, but it can't really be explained in 15 minutes, and my thesis will get uploaded to the Hatfield Library shortly, so if anyone's interested, feel free to check that out. But what I want to talk about today is what I think a lot of people in politics want to talk about a lot of the time, which is Donald Trump. So Donald Trump has received no shortage of criticism for his responses to COVID-19. Here we have a tweet from Ronald Plain, who was Obama's Ebola czar, talking about how pandemic response up until now has been a bipartisan matter that transcended sort of congressional squabbles and Democrat, Republican that we are kind of used to seeing these days. And this tweet is from 2018. He tweeted something similarly February this year regarding COVID, but the tweet was taken down. But what he's saying here is that Trump is some kind of special risk. He's posing some threat to how we respond to pandemics that has never been seen before. And it is true that Trump has ignored the warnings of the Rand Corporation and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which have presented that pandemics are the only valid existential threat to America. Or he's ignored warnings from at least 10 federal agencies saying that the U.S. lacks the ventilators to respond to a large-scale pandemic. He's claimed COVID-19 was being used as a political ploy by the Democratic Party to firm his re-election odds. And he also has endorsed a drug that has never been proven by the FDA to fight COVID-19, which he has financial stake in, and blamed the Obama administration for not restocking the strategic national stockpile with COVID-19 tests, even though these were impossible to in existence before COVID-19 existed. But what I really wanted to answer, and what I encourage you all to question, is are these problems which are specific to the Trump administration, or are these problems which are part of a larger system? And will these problems go away when Trump is out of office, or are these issues things that we will have to compensate for in future presidencies? First, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we respond to international pandemic. And our modern framework for pandemic response was really developed theoretically in the 1980s and effectuated during the Clinton administration in the 1990s, which views pandemics as security threats, even organically arising infectious diseases are security risks because they threaten the health of the American public. Now, this kind of came to head in the midst of a security renaissance in the 1980s when the sort of traditional view of security as a military matter differentiated into involving things like resource security, health security, and counterterrorism. So the public health was in decline because of significant investments in public health programming. More Americans were dying of infectious diseases than in previous years. And when watchdog organizations started to realize this under the Clinton administration, public health became a security issue. And in quick succession, we saw the Amshinrikyo sarin gas attacks, and then the anthrax attacks after 9/11, as well as indications that the Soviet Union had been developing chemical weapons. And this really changed how we effectuate pandemic response because this operational field of biosecurity came to involve the issues of bioterrorism. So the 1990s were really when we saw this combination of public health and national security into the pandemic response framework. So I want to emphasize that these two groups, the public health groups and national security, are foundational to an effective pandemic response. Public health provides the baseline for a resilient country, while national security provides a powerful crisis response and the sort of emergency situation, or the handling of emergency situations. So now I want to talk a little bit about how the Trump administration's response to COVID-19 involved these factors. The first thing that he's been criticized for significantly is non-compliance with expert knowledge. So in some ways, the guidance of the CDC and WHO has been ignored. For example, the emphasis on quickly reopening the country, the delays of wide-scale testing, and then the endorsement of non-proven cures have all been advised against by the CDC and the WHO, but have been done anyway. Furthermore, he's made controversial appointments to the CDC and Health and Human Services. Like the current director of the HHS is Alex Ssrd, the former CEO of Eli Lilly, who is one of the firms responsible for the exorbitant prices of insulin. And Robert Redfield, in charge of the CDC, has malconduct allegations against him for his handling of HIV in Africa. There's also a lack of support for local healthcare that's being seen in the administration at large, cuts to public health and attempted cuts to public health, which damage the capacity for local agencies to respond to COVID-19 cases. But at the same time, both Bush and Clinton appointed controversial picks to the HHS and the CDC, commercial interests in the case of the administration, and politically very partisan players in Bush's case who suppressed reports from surgeon generals about how poverty and health interplay. And actually, no president has successfully effectuated the kind of local healthcare support that has been recommended by the WHO, the CDC, and the HHS. There's been a lot of non-compliance with expert knowledge that's been seen across the decade. It's not just a problem that Trump has. He's also been criticized for defunding public health, attempting to shut down donations to the WHO, consistent failed attempts at defunding the CDC. He didn't restock the strategic national stockpile after deployments, which is why we're seeing part of why we're seeing the shortage of N95 masks. But the thing is, he's not the only president to have significantly defunded public health. Bush did the same. And Obama didn't restock the strategic national stockpile after his deployments of N95 masks. And while we can't completely blame either of these presidents for their failures to make these consistent commitments to public health, it's also not something Trump is uniquely responsible for. There's also the issue of a delayed crisis response, the fact that he took a long time to acknowledge the seriousness and the gravity of the situation, and the delayed ability to deploy things like rapid testing for most civilians. But again, this isn't something that's unique to him. During Zika in 2014 to 2016, significant issues with how it was messaged to the American population really perpetuated how far it spread and how many people are still feeling the effects of Zika infections to this day. Likewise, during SARS in 2003, George Bush didn't even mention it publicly until 6 weeks after it had arisen. So again, another thing where there is a precedent of presidents behaving similar to the situation. This is actually where I identify the most significant issues with the Trump administration's response, and this is the issue of desecuritizing of health. So as Trump expanded the security budget by billions of dollars, he eliminated biosecurity programs chaired within the DHS and the Department of Defense, meaning that while increasing our budget for security, he recategorized issues relating to pandemic response as non-security matters, as public health matters, and was able to defund them that way. So despite the increasing security budget, we're actually not any more secure in terms of health. Likewise, he did remove the entire National Security Council's pandemic response team. Whether they were fired or whether they were reorganized is still kind of up for debate. But this did contribute to the re-siloing of pandemic response into public health and Department of Health and Homeland Security, which eliminates our ability to effectuate quick. But the thing is, Obama kind of did this in reverse during his presidency by expanding public health while targeting biosecurity programs within the Public Health Administration for defunding. So both of these presidents have actually, in kind of different ways, reduced our ability to respond dynamically to public health or to pandemics and public health emergencies. So now I want to talk about what is unique about the Trump response, and I want to emphasize that when I talk about this precedent, there are definitely ways in which the scope and the scale of of the inefficiencies of the administration's response are unique and they are distinctive. And I think that the massive loss of lives that we've seen both in this country and across the globe, it's not a negligible difference between him and past presidents. But I do want to emphasize that there's precedent for everything that he's widely criticized for. There's also the issue of the tone and the messaging that I think has never been seen before, the levity and lack of gravity that this situation is being treated with is important and it is of substantial concern. But the most fundamental issue that I think is unique about the Trump response is this sort of desecuritization process discussed. By eliminating biosecurity divisions of the DHS and eliminating our ability to respond dynamically and well and value health, the Trump administration and also past presidents have really put in a bad position to respond dynamically if health crises. Now, my more general findings, I don't find any evidence of Klain's claim that pandemic is a nonpartisan issue. I think that public health and national security are partisan, being associated very strongly with Democrats and other parties. And so even though both parties do have means through which they can effectuate a pandemic response, the methodological differences in these responses are substantive, and I think that it's sort of erroneous to claim that it's nonpartisan just because they both do respond. The differences between their responses are significant, and clearly we've seen that in certain situations like this one, the devaluation of public health can result in a non-response. I also want to emphasize that scientific leadership is being underutilized and it's hindered by the politicization of diseases. Because the executive has the ability to choose is chaired by who is in power in the DHS and the HHS. You get to choose your advisors, so you already are filled with scientific leadership athletes. And then because they lack an ability to express substantive power, there's ways through which that scientific leadership gets filtered and weakened in certain senses. And furthermore, securitization is very important to effectuating pandemic response, but it's not enough to ensure our health security. Because of public health being desecuritized, we're lacking this crucial crisis response, which allows for the deployment of emergency capabilities. Our response fund, our National Complex Crisis Fund, has been eliminated, and this has really influenced our ability to respond to public health emergencies. But furthermore, health security has been on the decline for years. People in health organizations, both governmental and non-governmental, have been very concerned about this for decades, and yet no president and no administration has been able to place concerns. Public health security is the most fundamental part of ensuring that we are safe in response to pandemics, but also that we're healthy as a nation. And unfortunately, it has been completely deprioritized for a very long time. I want to emphasize that as I'm coming to the end of my presentation, that Trump is a symptom and not a cause. He's a symptom of a system we've created in which appointments to the CDC and HHS are basically based on partisan affiliations. We have a lack of substantive channels for scientific leadership to express substantive power. There are continued failures of politicians from both parties to make these powerful investments in public health that need to be made. And disease has become politicized and treated as a matter of debate rather than a threat that affects all of us regardless of partisan affiliation. But I do want to say that there are silver linings to this. In the aftermath of COVID-19, we might realize that this is a shock we needed. Just as during the public health declines in the 80s, we realized that we really needed to refocus our efforts on public health. This might be the thing that does it in the 21st century. We're already seeing some signs of this change, like Medicare covering testing for people with private insurance. And even though these changes are small, they can evolve into something larger. And furthermore, because this pandemic has affected so many countries, we're seeing a lot of variance in how effective different responses have been. We're seeing major differences between how countries like America and how countries like Taiwan and Germany have fared in this crisis. And the emphasis on these differences can be really powerful in helping us create lasting change. I want to acknowledge my thesis advisor, Greg Felker, as well as Professor Sammy Basu, as being really fundamental and necessary in me being able to create this research. And I also wanted to thank Josh Lazen for organizing Ssrd, as well as the technical support and moderators of this group for making this all possible. And I also wanted to thank my roommates, Jay and Sammy, for keeping me sane and for helping me practice this and come up with the title. So yes, and thanks to everybody in this chat for tuning in today. It really means a lot. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll open it up for questions now.